Sten, we're live.
And a great thank you again to Larry the Liberty Guy, and welcome back in the dugout. I am your host, Mike Stenhouse. I'm on a bit of a high today. I think we had a tremendous. You might have heard webinar last night. You might have heard me mention it on yesterday's show, but if you didn't, we had a private, with groups that are aligned with our center. We had Dr. Andrew Bostom, who we've seen every week on the show. Dr. Michelle Cretella, who's been on this show a few times, one of the top pediatricians, or head one of the top pediatrician associations in the country. Both are on advising parents on whether or not their teens should get the vaccine. We call it Vaccines for Teens, ? And it was really just intended to be a private service, a private event, exclusive event to parents with, who belong to aligned groups. But we got so much positive feedback, both during the show and after, that we're going to eventually make the entire webinar public, because most of the parents felt like, hey, this is such great, valuable information the government's not giving us. Every parent in Rhode Island needs to hear this. Well, obviously, we're not going to reach every parent, but we are going to make it publicly available. And today, we're going to share 3 clips with you a little bit later on from last night's webinar. Tomorrow, we'll do a few more of them with Dr. Bostom. So I'll talk more about the webinar in a minute, set that up before we get into the clips. We even have some updated information just today that I wish we had last night. But again, this is our job, to give you information. This is the role we play. We're a 501c3 nonprofit for a reason. We provide information and perspectives to you. The IRS considers that social education, educating the public on issues of importance. That's why we're a 501c3, regardless of what philosophy we take. And last night, I felt like we performed a great public service. And I think most of the parents who were on that webinar last night would agree, and that's how I feel today. And you're going to hear some of the advice and comments from our doctors from last night in just about 15 minutes from now. So again, this is what we're here to do. It's one of the few times we've done an actual private forum like that. Most everything we do is out there publicly. This one will be out there publicly soon. Okay. And I have some big new information Dr. Bostom has uncovered today that we'll tell you about right before we give you those clips. Also today, we have a guest from the New England Convenience Store and Energy Marketers Association. You may have seen in the Providence Journal, I think it was on Monday or Sunday, I can't remember, but there was an opinion piece in the Providence Journal about why his organization and convenience store owners do not want this TCI gas tax. As it turns out, the Senate version of that bill is being heard today. In fact, it was heard right before the show started, and the hearing may be ongoing. Because of the show, I can't testify live, but I did submit written testimony today against the bill. That was Senate Bill 872. So we'll have John Scher on as our guest. We will conclude the show with Judge Robert Flanders. Did you know abortion is back in the legal spotlight? Everybody thinks this is a settled issue, but it's not. Pro-choice advocates are trying to expand the reach of abortion. They're trying to get taxpayers to pay it more. They want young girls to have abortions without parental consent. There's all kinds of issues yet to be decided. There's a bill in Rhode Island that would allow your funding, my funding, taxpayer funding, to pay for abortions for Medicaid recipients. I submitted testimony on that bill, which we talked about last week. No, that's my tax dollars. How can you spend it on something that I'm so religiously and personally opposed to so strong? But there's a Mississippi case that we're going to talk about with Judge Flanders, as well as a couple other legal issues with Judge Flanders. But abortion is going to be back in the spotlight. And all I can say is I hope everything remains peaceful, because this is like, listen, I'm not a woman, but it's for reasons I don't understand. It's the most emotional issue out there, I think, of anything. And as we'll discuss with Judge Flanders, it's one of the reasons why, Joe Biden and the left wants to stack the courts to make sure that abortion is never overturned or chipped away at. Again, it's the number one battle cry from the left. Hey, that's their right. And we'll talk about that with Judge Flanders coming up tomorrow. Hope to have some feedback on the Senate TCI bill. I'm hoping that Chris Carlozzi from the National Federation of Independent Businesses will be able to join us. He too has submitted testimony. If not, we'll try to get maybe one of the committee members, maybe somebody to join us and let us know how the hearings went. Again, those hearings could still be going on right now. They started earlier this afternoon. And of course, Dr. Andrew Bostom will join us tomorrow for the bottom half hour, and we'll discuss more about the webinar we held last evening and whatever else is new on the vaccine. Okay, so
Hey, boss, before you get into the next topic, are you forgetting something?
am I forgetting something? Oh, yeah, I have it right here. See, this is why Larry the Liberty Guy is vital to this operation. How can I have a in the dugout, Joe, without an in the dugout cap on? Is that what you're referring to, Mr. Liberty Guy?
Absolutely, boss.
All right. Yeah, I usually say let's get into batting practice now and go over some of these other issues. The TCI bill, I'm going to spend just another minute on that. That's really important. Because we've been warning you against this, advocating against this for almost a year and a half now, since we learned about it last October or November of 2019, when we learned that this was coming. And everything we said about it is true. And they're lying about it to the government. They're trying to downplay how much of a tax, how they're going to add, how they're going to downplay how much they're going to limit supplies. Welcome back to gas shortages and long gas lines again. You just saw that happen with the Colonial Pipeline. It's going to happen again. So, we're getting doubly whammed here, as we'll talk about with our guests later on. You've got Joe Biden's policies already causing gas prices to skyrocket, and now they want to skyrocket them even more with this really anti-jobs, anti-business tax. So stay tuned. Really good interview with John Scher coming up. All right, on a few other items. Yesterday, we talked at the beginning of the show, we called for the emergency powers to be ended in this state. We had Mask Freedom Day yesterday. We showed you our statement calling for an end to all emergency powers. We're not in an emergency anymore. We still have a pandemic. We still got to deal with some of it. But it's just like any other affliction or flu or cold now. It's not an emergency. Let's end the emergency orders. Well, in Pennsylvania, the silent majority, well, maybe I should say the muzzled majority, those of everyone who's been muzzled with masks and other executive order mandates, they stripped Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf of his emergency powers. They had a referendum in Pennsylvania, and the pro-liberty citizens of Pennsylvania voted by 8 percentage points, 54 to 46, to say end the governor's absurd and tyrannical executive powers. Now, do you know we don't have such a mechanism in Rhode Island called referendum by initiative or initiative by referendum? That's why we need a constitutional convention in this state to put in some of these pro-taxpayer tools so that taxpayers, you, the citizens, can be more involved and have a more direct say in our government. A constitutional convention can return power to the people. That's why we refer to a constitutional convention in states as a people's convention. I mean, can anyone listening to this broadcast disagree that the special interests, the special agendas are the ones getting all the attention and all the benefits from government, while you and me, the people, are the ones being ignored and even worse, being asked to pay for all that junk? Only a state constitutional convention can set it straight. So good news there from Pennsylvania. Okay. last night, let's spend a few minutes on last night, then we'll get into clips in a few more minutes. First of all, we started off talking about masks, and again, this last night's webinar was vaccines for teens, ? It was designed to give parents information that the government is not just not giving you, but they're hiding from you. In their manic push to vaccinate everybody, including people who don't need the vaccine, like 12 to 17-year-olds, teens, they are downplaying the risks of the vaccine and overplaying the risks of the virus. And they seem to think that this vaccine can be a one-size-fits-all solution for every family, for every student, for every child, and it's not. You know, I hate to say it, but the government is not being straight with us. I mean, they never cite the research when they say they're basing their decisions on the science. And yet our doctors who we have on the show and who we had on our webinar last night, did cite the research that contravenes pretty much everything the government's been telling us. And I just can't for the life of me understand why. So we started off last night about the impact of masks on children. Again, this is all about teens, parents joining this webinar. So this one doesn't have to do with kids so much. It's a little funny here, but here's the dog saying, boy, these adults seem a lot happy now that their muzzles are off. And I guess the sub point here could be, just imagine what I felt like when you used to put muzzles on me, you know, as a pet. But yeah, that's what we did. We were muzzled. And that's why, you know, I mentioned the muzzled majority in Pennsylvania overrode the governor's absurd executive orders and his absurd executive powers in emergencies. So, you know, this was all, again, I'm just doing a few other funnies because I think we got to have some hilarity in here. We talked about this on yesterday's show, that there's this new joke movement called transvaxites, people who identify as having been vaccinated even though they haven't. But isn't that what it's all about? Just how you identify? So if you can identify as a male, then you want to identify, you know, even though you're a biological girl, why can't you identify as being vaxxed even though you haven't been vaxxed, even though you're not? And then here's a t-shirt I just saw today. I identify as vaccinated. So again, I do this just to point out the hypocrisy of the left. All right, now, last night we shared a lot of information with our parents on the pros and cons, and as it turned out, mostly cons, as to whether or not their teenage children should be vaccinated. And there's two pieces of information that our Dr. Andrew Bostom just saw today that we weren't able to tell the parents about last night, but I want to tell you about right now. So first, and here's a tweet from Dr. Bostom, and I actually heard it on the radio earlier today. But as Dr. Bostom suggested in reading the data last week, and as the Department of Health confirmed to Matt Allen, the radio host, there have been 0 deaths in Rhode Island, 0, among pediatrics, that's under, I don't know, under 18, I guess, that are basically were caused by COVID-19. Apparently a few kids died from other conditions, and they might have had tested positive for the virus, but nobody fully attributable to COVID, no pediatric age child in this state has died. Further, nationally, and I think this is nationally, Dr. Bostom saying there's been a couple of studies that are now saying that even when it comes to pediatric hospitalizations regarding COVID, that those numbers were massively overstated. They were in there for a broken leg, or they were in there for some other condition and they either were assumed to have or just tested positive for COVID, but COVID was not the reason they were in the hospital. And we know this is true with many people who are designated as COVID cases in the hospital, that they're really not there for COVID reasons. And you can see here some of these numbers. There it is, 40%, 40 to 45% of of what was classified as COVID-19 admissions. Those admissions were not caused by COVID. Those were caused by something else. And I'm not exactly sure what this means, but 32 of 68, I guess, of those who did have the disease, of those 68, almost half of those weren't the reason for the hospitalization. So the reason we bring this up is because it's what I just mentioned a little while ago, what we spent a lot of time last night talking about at our webinar for parents, that the state is trying to exaggerate the dangers of COVID to young people, to children. And those dangers, as we've been saying all along, as Dr. Boston's been saying along, as Dr. Cretella has been saying along, and as you just see from these two new reports, those dangers are virtually non-existent. So, important new information. Wish we had it last night. We made those claims last night. I just wish we had these two reports at our fingertips, but now we have them. So again, we're validated again. Every time when I say we, I'm talking about our little COVID advisory team of Dr. Cretella, Dr. Bostom. We have been validated on some cycle thresholds all the way up the line on virtually everything we've been correct on. So, and the government's been wrong on, which is why last night's webinar was so important, because parents must have both sides of the story. And then it's up to them to make the best decision. It's a tough decision when you're hearing two wildly different things, but that's our role, whether it's economics, education, healthcare, that's our role, is to give you the other side of the story in order to round out the important debates in our society. All right, let's go to some of the clips from last night. This first one, now some of these clips are a little, long, a couple of minutes. So this first one isn't quite as long, but this one is from our webinar last night. And this one is about the effects of extensive mask wearing on kids. We talked about masks first. Psychologically, medically, the effect of overuse or extensive use of masks in children. Just a quick comment on that. And all quick comments today.
Sure. Yeah, I could give you 3 points. There's the very practical. When you're dealing with young kids, it's very counterproductive in the sense that young kids are all their snot, their snacks, and everything is ending up in the mask, and then so they're basically walking around with this dirty diaper on their face, right? That's certainly not cleanly or going to prevent infection. And what's worse, the younger ones tend to even trade masks too. I mean, breathing is good for your health. And the very first comment I got from, whether it was family, friends, parents, was, I put a mask on, I can't breathe so well. I mean, you do notice a difference. It does impair the exchange. So I guess that's 2 points. I think the bigger concern that we are seeing is that with kids, especially the young, it's preteens, not preteens, sorry, preschool and teenagers, is anxiety. In your preschoolers, that not just eye contact, but facial expression is so important to convey warmth, security, and relationship. Without that, it is very anxiety provoking, and it also impairs their social development. And
so if parents have the option, school recommends your child wear a mask, are you of the firm opinion, again, we're not here to coerce anybody, but are you of the firm opinion that if they have that option, they should
throw
not?
the mask out? throw the masks out.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
now, sir, I think Dr. Boston would have gone over, we have 12 randomized controlled trials.
Yeah.
The highest level of science says that masks outside the medical setting do not reduce transmission of respiratory viruses. So it's anti-science. Wearing masks outside medical is anti-science, and we are only damaging our children, most especially in terms of social development and anxiety. With the teenagers, mental health issues have just simply skyrocketed, and the mask itself does produce anxiety.
That was one segment. This is the kind of information parents have. These are all in response to questions posed by parents. The whole show was Q&A. Questions that were emailed to us ahead of time, or questions that were asked in the chat box. So these are the things parents and you are probably concerned about. So, pretty clear opinion there from Dr. Cretella that masks on children in schools for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, physically difficult to get the proper air. I'm not going to kill you, obviously, but it's just not healthy to be bad air, and psychologically, and that's the thing we don't talk about often. So it's unclear what the mask mandates will be for schools. I mean, we've lifted the mask mandates for society. Why the heck would we have them in schools? All right, this next clip, I believe, is Dr. Boston providing some statistics on how it's not proper to think of the COVID-19 vaccination as we do the annual flu shot. That the statistics show that when it comes to safety and incidence, they're just not the same.
That I can refer to. So this is for 18 to 49 years old. And if anything, it's probably gotten a little bit worse now. But there's about, in terms of hospitalizations per million, remember folks, this is per million. You're looking at numbers for COVID through a recent period, through the end of April. That would be about 45.7 hospitalizations per million versus 2 per million on the average of those 4 flu years.
All right.
So again, the absolute numbers are small, but the relative numbers jump out at you.
Okay.
In terms of death, it's about 3.4 per million for the COVID vaccines. It's very low, 0.05 per million. So small in absolute numbers, but they're Mike. The point is they're not the same, and people shouldn't be told.
They shouldn't be treated the same.
So here you see the two doctors again in agreement, just giving you the CDC statistics that there are more. And again, we're not trying to scare anyone here, but this is the data, right? This is the data that parents need to know. This is, the way they're pushing the vaccine to make it seem just as every day as the flu shot. And remember, the flu shot is fully FDA approved. We've been doing flu shots for decades. We know there are no severe long-term impacts. And the data shows there's very few on the flu shots, very few severely adverse reactions. But this COVID vaccine is very different. First of all, it's not fully FDA approved. It is experimental. As the doctor said last night, we, and potentially your children, are the experiment. They're still collecting the data on us. And it's going to be another year or two before we really know if there are any long-term adverse impacts. But even the near-term data shows that the COVID vaccines, even though, as the doctor stressed, even though the risk is still minutely small, it is significantly larger than the risk from the average flu vaccine. Again, you decide as parents, as family members, what to do with that information. We're just giving you the information. And this was the purpose of our show last night, and this is why we think it was a great public service. All right, let's go on to the last clip. This one about all right. Let's shift gears slightly. Here's a question that came in for Cheryl. As an alternative, I guess maybe not as an alternative necessarily, but do either of you believe that it's viable to try to just naturally strengthen your immune system via healthy eating and healthy lifestyle versus, getting vaccines or distancing or anything else? I mean, can is it possible that you can naturally strengthen your own immune system?
I've always looked at it as a both and situation personally. I mean, yeah, anyone who is deficient, nutritionally deficient, is going to have an impaired immune system. So and virtually everyone is vitamin D deficient. So I take a multivitamin, I take extra D and zinc right now, and C, and so forth, and eat a healthy diet and exercise. Yes. But you know, I believe in vaccine science. I believe vaccines have their role to play.
Okay, Dr. Bostom, how do you feel
Yeah,
about that?
I agree with Michelle. There's certainly you can inflict you know, you can ratchet down your immune function by being sleep deprived, nutritionally, you know, having an inadequate diet. I mean, a healthy lifestyle certainly is supportive of a healthier immune system. How far that's going to take you, I don't know. And it is true that clearly there's an association between vitamin D deficiency and an overall impairment in the immune system, which could be contributing to, you know, susceptibility to SARS-CoV-2 as well. So absolutely, all those things should be employed. And you know, there is a real question about all this distancing and what it's done. And then there's the whole question of other infections. You know, it looks like having a common cold, like the real common cold, rhinovirus, may actually protect you against SARS-CoV-2.
You might have developed the appropriate natural immunity.
It primes what's called the mucosal, the cells that line your nasal passages. It primes them in a way that may resist infection by SARS-CoV-2. But
right.
the point is, yes, we should be looking at things in a more holistic way, and not just focus on, you know, terrorizing people and masking them and separating them.
That was an interesting question. They didn't say it directly, but my interpretation of what they said was, yeah, listen, it's good for your general health to do things to increase, strengthen your natural immune system. But I didn't get the sense they were saying it could be a near term. You could do something in the near term that would replace having a vaccine, you know, if you're worried about catching the virus. So that was my interpretation of that. So this was the type of back and forth we had. I mean, there must have been 15, 20 questions we took from our participants last night. Again, we're gonna show more clips or talk about this more with Dr. Bostom tomorrow. Next Tuesday on the Ocean State Current, we will post the full 90-minute webinar, loaded with information, valuable to parents who are trying to decide if they want their children to have the vaccine. And I think the most important and disturbing thing we heard last night, and why what we did and the information you're hearing from these doctors is so important, is that we realize that even if parents go speak to their pediatrician is largely and most likely just getting the information that the state is giving. And in our view, that's either misinformation or it's incomplete information. How can you make a fully informed medical choice without being fully informed and properly informed? And this is why we're so critical of what the state is doing. There is no medical procedure or one size fits everybody. We discussed last night and on the show previously, if you just recovered from the virus, if you were infected and your body mounted a recovery, you're immune. Your natural immunity is probably higher than anything you can get from a vaccine. You don't need to take that extra risk with the vaccine. You don't need to. But why is the state indiscriminately pushing everybody to get it without even allowing for the possibility there might be some exceptions to the rule? Yeah, it's probably a good rule for a lot of people to get the vaccine. But there are always exceptions, and these knuckleheads up there refuse to acknowledge that. It's really disturbing, and the pediatricians are listening to them, as they should be. But it's tragic because they're not getting full and honest information. So again, we'll have more information for you soon on how you can watch that full webinar. Okay, let's turn now to some legal matters, and we're going to go to our resident expert, our board member of our center, former Associate Justice, Rhode Island Supreme Court, Judge Robert Flanders. Bob, welcome back to In the Dugout. What cap you got for us today? You're a good sport with that.
This is a tennis ventures cap. That's from a group that I've gone to some of the tennis grand slams with on a tennis playing and tennis watching venture. And so this is the cap they give you as part of the
Very good.
The arrangement.
Very good. Good. And I know you're an avid tennis player. But I do notice you've been too chick to never challenge me to a match. So we'll have to see about that. Okay, let's move on. All right, so we got three topics I want to cover with you. This first one, maybe just kind of quickly. So the OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and, Health and Hazard, whatever it stands for, apparently put out a new rule that said that any employee that, on the heels of this pandemic and with the vaccines now becoming part of our Nazi state, that any employer who mandates that their employees be vaccinated as a condition of employment, any adverse reaction to the vaccine would be treated as work-related. From a legal perspective, what does that mean to you? What are the implications of that?
Well, the question is whether that sort of work-related action could translate into, say, for example, a workers' compensation claim which is a state procedure and process whereby injuries at work on work-related tasks are generally compensable under the workers' compensation process. But even at the OSHA level and certainly at the workers' compensation level in the state courts, there's going to be a causation issue, meaning what kind of proof will there be that any adverse reaction to a vaccination is in fact caused by the requirement that they get vaccinated, or whether some other condition precipitated the adverse reaction.
All right, so let me put it in my terms. You tell me if I'm restating it properly. So it appears to be saying that if the employer mandates a vaccination to come back to work or to work, you get an adverse reaction, that's going to be considered work-related, whether or not because of that requirement, and that could trigger a workers' compensation claim for somebody who had an adverse reaction to the vaccine, rare as they are. Now, so is this kind of the same thing like with firefighter law? Wasn't it like last year or 2 years ago, they said any firefighter or police officer who gets cancer, it's going to be considered on the job?
Yes.
Is this the same idea here?
Yes, in concept it is. It's giving presumptions, perhaps even presumptions that can't be rebutted, that if an employer mandates that a vaccination occur and there's an adverse reaction, and it's provable medically that that was an adverse reaction that occurred after being vaccinated, then it's going to be deemed automatically to be work-related and therefore compensable. Now,
If it's compensable, is it also suable? I mean, could somebody say, well, you forced me to get the vaccine, I had this bad effect, therefore I'm suing you?
well, suing, it would have to be in workers' comp, because workers' comp takes the place.
Okay, so
of
workers' comp
lawsuit.
is lawsuit, okay.
Right, it's the exclusive method for employees to challenge and recover for work-related injuries. So they don't have the option of going to court. They have to go through the workers' compensation.
Oh, okay, see, I don't even know how that works.
But it's
Okay.
definitely legal, Mike, for employers to require their employees to be vaccinated, subject to religious or disability issues that may be presented by any given employee. But otherwise, they can indeed and have been in some cases requiring that. Others are just advising them to do it.
All right. Would you consider this rule change something that employers would see as an incentive or a disincentive to put such vaccine requirements in place?
Well, yeah, I think it would be a disincentive. I would think it would push them more towards advising employees to get vaccinated without mandating it. And of course, that would be more consistent with the freedom that we would hope that employees would have to make judgments about what they should do or not do.
Of course, but it's inconsistent with the federal push. This is a federal agency, the federal push to get everybody in the world vaccinated, no matter what their condition. So it is weird that this Biden administration would allow such a rule to move forward. But anyway, that's the case. All right, we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on that. Thanks for your perspective on that. All right, let's move over to topic we haven't talked about much on this show, but the very controversial issue of abortion. And the Supreme Court made big news on that just Monday of this week. They're going to be hearing a case and putting forth a major ruling next year on abortion. One that, a lot of court observers feel could upend, a lot of the Supreme Court's landmark Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey decisions. Pro-life advocates are hailing the Supreme Court's decision to look at this Mississippi law, which was struck down in lower appeals courts. But the law said that no more abortions basically after 15 weeks or when a fetus is viable. And they claim that that's consistent with Roe v. Wade's original language, that only non-viable babies. So anyway, is this case as momentous as you think it might be, as others think it might be?
Any abortion case that directly deals with state limitations on the availability of abortion has the potential to be momentous. But in this case, the real question is whether, given the changing status of viability, because with science now making the fetus more and more viable at earlier and earlier stages, does the Roe v. Wade formula still apply, which really would say that, if anything earlier than 23 weeks would be considered a non-viable fetus. I don't know that scientifically that's still the case. This particular challenge is to a 15-week restriction. So it's possible that that may factor into the court's decision. But anytime you're dealing with the availability of abortions and the state's ability to restrict that is potentially considered an undue burden on a woman's right to choose, which was the fundamental ruling in the Roe case. So yes, it has the potential to have the court take another look at the whole Casey and Planned Parenthood and Roe v. Wade formulation.
Yep. Well,
But
many pro-life advocates sort of been waiting for this moment. Well, this law, I wouldn't think it would have the potential to strike down Roe v. Wade. Certainly could chip away at it, I would think. And of course, pro-choice advocates are bemoaning, what is potentially, 6 pro-life judges on the Supreme Court. Although Judge Roberts, you never know where he's going to end up anymore. But that still would leave a potential 5-4 pro-life decision on the Supreme Court. How do you handicap, those 9 judges and, just speculating right now?
yeah, I think it's really hard to do that because, as you just pointed out, Chief Judge Roberts has been swinging back and forth with the so-called liberal wing and the conservative wing in recent years. And I think it'll be difficult for the new judges, particularly the latest Judge Amy Barrett, to jump right into this abortion debate when she said she was going to be strictly looking at precedents. So I would think that if anything is likely to happen here, it's not going to be a sweeping ruling. It'll be very narrow,
Okay.
and it could go either way, frankly.
To the issue at hand. Okay. All right.
Right.
Let me read a statement to you from the American College of Pediatricians, the executive director. I don't know if you know her, Michelle, Dr. Michelle Cretella. She's been a guest also on this show. They issued a statement. I would just want to see if you agreed with their statement. In agreeing to, the statement goes, in agreeing to hear this case, the Supreme Court will clarify its jurisprudence on abortion regarding states' authority to enact laws that protect maternal health, safeguard unborn babies, and promote respect for innocent life. You know, I want to focus in on states' authority. In your view, did Roe v. Wade restrict states' authorities in this case? And if so, did it do so unjustly?
Certainly, Roe v. Wade restricted state authority, as did Planned Parenthood. They really basically said that before the fetus is viable outside the womb, the states cannot regulate in a way that would place a so-called undue burden on a woman's right to terminate the pregnancy. So, you know, if in fact the viability doctrine, which heretofore was at 23 weeks, is now moved back to 15, which would really get into an earlier viability period than previously the court has allowed. That might be still a question, because the issue would be, is the fetus viable outside the womb at 15 weeks? And in some cases it might be.
Yep.
So,
all right, well, it's concern over, you know, it's the left's concern. So let's move to the next topic here. So it's the concern over this issue largely that has the left up in arms about the makeup of the Supreme Court and why they're calling to stack it with more liberal judges so that big decisions like this might go in their favor. And as it turned out, some people are saying that it is this Supreme Court decision to hear this case that has given this commission that met for the first time yesterday, President Biden's executive order commission. Apparently it's got, I don't know, dozens of legal experts who are going to look at the Supreme Court. And I guess the primary, you know, it's under the guise of total review, but we know that we're looking at whether or not they should expand the court such that they can stack it with more liberals. Well, what do you think of this commission that Biden is putting together?
well, I think this is indeed a move to remind the court that to the extent it strays from the positions that President Biden and the Democratic majority in the House and the Senate think are appropriate, that the Congress has ways of checking their jurisdiction and power to hear cases, and indeed to restructure the court by adding new judges, by putting term limits, by restricting their jurisdiction. There are all kinds of ways that could happen. And so this commission is sort of a reminder, a sort of Damocles, if you will, hanging over the court, reminding them that if they don't toe the party line here in terms of outcomes, they could very well face a major restructuring.
Now, we talked about this last time you were on the show, that you see these statements by the left, by Chuck Schumer, by candidate President Biden, that these are directly intended to influence, if not subliminally, threaten the Supreme Court. That if you, like you said, if you don't toe the line, we're going to put in some major reforms that are going to reduce your power. So this is pure hardball politics trying to be disguised as a commission, right? And
yeah, I think that's consistent with these briefs that have been filed by Senator Whitehouse and other Democratic leaders, Senator Durbin, who have been very vocal about trying to get the court to stop issuing 5-4 decisions against positions that they are advocating for in their amici briefs. So, yeah, I see this as another opening another front on trying to pressure the court to curb decisions that they don't favor. And it's not very subtle at all.
Not very subtle at all. All right. Judge Robert Flanders, thanks so much for your astute commentary, and we'll have you back on the show soon. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Good day. All right, let's turn now to one of the topics our Center for Freedom and Prosperity has been advocating against for much of the last 18 months, and that's this TCI gas tax. We're going to have a guest to talk about that in just a minute, but let's set the stage first. Already, because of the left's policies under Joe Biden, shutting down the pipeline, the assault on traditional fossil fuels that we know are coming, we're already seeing 70-80% increase in gasoline. Part of that might be increased demand as the warmer weather and summer gets here, but still prices are way up compared to where they were before. The average price nationally was $2.20, now it's $3.04. And we know that the Biden agenda wants to put even more pressure federally on policies that will continue to limit the supply or at least the supply of American oil, and which means we'd have to pay for more expensive foreign oil, and not to mention any Green New Deal taxes on its own. So it's going to start getting expensive again to drive our cars from the federal level. But Rhode Island, as you may know, is itself looking to add costs to regular and diesel fuel in Rhode Island. And that's the famous TCI gas tax, the Transportation and Climate Initiative scheme that Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts are considering signing on to. So let's bring on our guest, John Scher. John, welcome to In the Dugout.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
You are the executive director of the New England, let me see, the New England store. It's a long name. Give me the name again. The New England Convenience Store and Fuel Marketers Association, or Energy Marketers Association. Did I get it right?
I'm going to clean that up for you. It's
clean it up.
New England Convenience Store and Energy Marketers Association.
Couldn't you come up with an easier name?
We could have, but it's the merger of two associations, the convenience stores and so that was the best we could do.
All right, so I'm going to share our screen and I'm going to show our viewers. You wrote an opinion piece. Now, you're based where, first of all? You're New England, or you represent all New England convenience stores and energy marketers.
Yeah, we're based in Stoughton, Massachusetts, but we represent businesses across New England.
All right, but here's the opinion piece you wrote in the Providence Journal just a few days ago, and you opined and you agree with us why TCI is wrong for Rhode Island. I'm sure it's also wrong so before we get to Rhode Island, tell me why it's wrong for your convenience store and energy marketers members.
Yeah, I mean, it's an overly burdensome and overly complex program that's totally unnecessary to raise money for carbon reduction initiatives. There are far simpler ways to go about doing this. This program threatens to disrupt what is a hyper-complex, highly efficient fuel distribution system that everyone depends on in one way or another. So what we're worried about is that the program will continue to put downward pressure on the number of gallons that can be sold in the state. But if consumption does not fall, or demand consumption does not fall with the allowance credits available, we're going to run into supply disruptions. No one knows the
gasoline shortages, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. And localized price spikes. No one understands the fuel. I've spent 20 years in fuel distribution in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. There are certainly people that know this issue better than I do, but I don't think there's anybody that brings the knowledge of that's in a state association position that has spent 20 years in fuels marketing. So I fully understand how fragile the efficiency of this system is. Look no further than what happened in the Colonial
There you go, right.
Just a week ago. Certainly a cyber attack is a serious thing, but they had to shut it down. And what did you see? you saw stores running out of gas. You saw prices start to spike. You saw nationwide interest in this, even though it was really localized to the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. So it's just an indication of how fragile and sensitive this fuel distribution system is, and TCI really threatens that.
And we've noted on, on this show many times, and in pieces in research we've written that these TCI proponents, which is really a cap and trade system that not only increases cost but limits the supply. And again, it's the limiting of the supply, I think, as you said, that is the main problem. Is they're just going to make less gas available to motorists in Rhode Island. But on the tax side, it's highly flawed, because as you know, that the gasoline taxes are inelastic, and that you can raise them or drop them, fairly significant amounts, and you're not going to see that much change in behavior, because people have to go to the store, they have to go to work, they have to take their kids to school or whatever. I mean, you can't really stop driving. But they want to force you to by reducing the slides. And we know the tax component, they're saying they're only going to raise taxes 5 cents a year. That's ridiculous. It's not going to change any habit. It's not going to save any CO2 emissions, right? I mean, aren't they just being dishonest with the people that by implementing this TCI gas tax, that's somehow going to save the environment?
I think they're being clever. And there's a lot to it. You're right. 5 cents is not going to change behavior. We've said that. And it's, first of all, this business of it being only 5 cents, it's not genuine. And here's why. Let me just briefly give you, these credits are going to be sold at auction. Some of the credits will, many of the credits will be sold at auction for a set price, but a lot of distributors aren't going to be able to get those credits at the auction. They're going to have to go out on the secondary market and buy them. I don't know what the secondary market price is going to be. It isn't going to be 5 cents. It isn't going to be what it was sold at auction for. And this is really interesting.
And they could really inflate the gas price there, right, in that secondary market, right?
It could go down. The point is I don't know. And for someone to say it's going to be only 5 cents, that's just disingenuous. No one knows. And it could even be localized. One company that needs them might have to go out and get them, and is going to pay through the nose, and they're going to pass that along. So the other reason that they're being clever is by calling it a fee and not a tax, and that's done intentionally. And the reason for that, and if you see it's very strongly worded about, this is not a fee, this is not a tax, this is a fee. And the reason for that is taxes need to be voted on. Fees don't. Yeah, okay. And so the legislature will never need to take a vote on raising this cost,
an unpopular vote,
carbon reduction.
Right, and we're handing authority to a bunch of third-party bureaucrats in Georgetown, DC, right, Washington, DC, who are going to do whatever the hell they want with the price, the cost, and the supply of these tokens, right? All right, so, do you remember, we're hearkening back right now, this colonial pipeline, harkened us back to gas shortages of the 1979s under Jimmy Carter. Well, this could accomplish the same thing. All right, let's switch it around and let's go hypothetical. Right now, only 3 states are on a fast path to implement this. The other original 10 or 11 jurisdictions kind of backed away. So this thing is losing popularity, but this is Charlie Baker's dream in Massachusetts. Governor Raimondo was one of the major proponents early on, and Connecticut is similarly. So they're the only 3 states talking about it. Let's, for the sake of argument, assume Rhode Island, we can save Rhode Island from this tax, and that Massachusetts and Connecticut goes ahead with it. Wouldn't the lower prices being able to be offered, gas prices in Rhode Island by convenience stores and other energy marketers, be a major competitive advantage? And wouldn't that lead to a massive flow of cross-border shopping for gasoline truckers, making sure they stop in Rhode Island? Wouldn't Rhode Island gain a major competitive advantage by not joining on to this TCI scheme?
Absolutely. If Connecticut and Massachusetts participate, which would be shocking if either of those states chose to do it, just the 2 of them in DC. I mean, this thing was sold as a regional play.
Right.
2 states plus DC is not a regional play. Even 3 states and DC is not a regional play. But back to your point, if Rhode Island was to choose not to participate, it would be enormously profitable for the state. Think about diesel trucks that can go hundreds of miles from, say, New York, leapfrog Connecticut, fuel in Rhode Island, and then continue up further north, or the other way south.
They'd make a point of doing it, just like we make a point of stopping in New Hampshire for liquor on our way back from Maine, right?
I think people probably have a certain stereotype of truck drivers in mind, but let me tell you something. These are sophisticated companies with highly sophisticated software programs that are able to determine where to buy fuel cheapest and actually project when to buy it. A lot of times these drivers aren't making these decisions on their own. They're being told.
And we know this is true even when it comes to Rhode Island's trucker tolls. A lot of they're calculating, is it better to bypass Rhode Island altogether? So yes.
I'll give you an anecdote too. So as I'm sure you know, Massachusetts in June of 2020 banned flavored tobacco. We saw all those sales migrate to New Hampshire and Rhode Island. Well, and when that happened, obviously those 2 states picked up all those tobacco sales, but the stores that we surveyed in New Hampshire and Rhode Island, the ones that benefited, not only did their tobacco sales go up naturally, their entire in-store sales went up.
Right, all the ancillary purchases, right?
We call that the market basket. And it stands to reason that the same thing would happen if Rhode Island had a lower fuel price consistently. And by the way, we're not talking just year one when it's nickel, because actually that would balance things out, because Rhode Island right now is a little bit higher than Mass on their excise tax. But over time, as Massachusetts and Connecticut continue to get more expensive, those South County and northern county states are going to just reap the benefits in a variety of ways.
So there is an advantage we can gain if we put some critical thinking into this. All right, last question for you, and sort of related. The argument always goes here with whether it's minimum wage, whether it's some other employer mandate. We have to keep pace with Connecticut and Massachusetts. We have to keep pace with them. It's so backwards thinking when you look at actual competitive advantages. So on behalf of your convenience store owners and energy marketeers in Rhode Island, would you say that they think it's in their competitive advantage to raise gas taxes to keep pace with Massachusetts and Connecticut?
I think it's just convenient. They want to raise the they want to reap more revenue. And if there's cover because the other states are doing it, I mean, look, if I put my
cover is the proper word. That's right.
Yeah. If I put myself in their shoes.
When you say their shoes, you're talking about the government?
Yeah, anybody that wants or needs to raise revenue for infrastructure. Let's
right, but I'm asking from the point of view of your store owners.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do they agree that we have to keep pace with Massachusetts and Connecticut?
Oh, of course not. No.
Okay, all right, that was my point.
I mean, they want the competitive advantage, and not only forget the fuel. I mean, they're facing all sorts of pressure on labor-related issues and additional costs of doing business. I don't have to tell you about the unemployment issue, federal unemployment dollars that have kept people from working. These are real issues that we deal with every single day. And if there's some way to gain a competitive advantage, I assure you that the business owners will be supportive of that.
And this is clear. TCI is clearly an anti-business, anti-jobs tax, isn't it?
It's anti-business, it's anti-jobs, it's also anti-Rhode Island, because it's going to cause problems for the people of Rhode Island that they cannot, unless they knew what I know, anticipate.
John Scher, you wrote a great opinion piece. TCI is wrong for Rhode Island. It's wrong for convenience store owners. It's wrong for motorists. It's wrong for our economy. It's wrong for business owners. It's wrong for jobs. Yet this governor and this General Assembly seemed inclined to support it. It just doesn't make sense. Nothing seems to make sense anymore. John Scher, thank you for joining us on In the Dugout.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay, good day. All right.
Hold on one second. Okay.
So as we wrap up our show, again, are you seeing the theme that we've been stressing the last few shows? Yesterday, I talked quite passionately about the failures of government. And here we see 3 more. I'll call them failures, because if they're not representing you, the everyday people, we, the people, it's a failure. They're representing special interests and special agendas and not you and me. That's a failure. Not necessarily a program that failed, but it's a failure of democracy. It's tyranny when they're not. That's what tyranny is. You know, everyone thinks tyranny is some really weird word, you know, like terror. No, tyranny is just when you have a government acting against the interests of the people without the consent of the people. That's all it is. And that's what's happening. So just think of it. So first with these, obviously with these government advisories on vaccines and on COVID, especially when it comes to youth, they're not representing your interests. They're actually telling you to do things that might be more dangerous for you to do. It's unbelievable to think that, but it's true. You know, when we think of the TCI gas tax, all of this economic uncertainty, this anti-job stuff, this gas tax, the higher prices, the purposely lowered supply, which will create supply shortages and long gas lines, and all with no environmental benefit, all just to advance an agenda, all without the best interests of you and me, we the people, in mind. And then finally, as we discussed with Judge Flanders, you know, we can feel honestly either way about the abortion issue, but this Biden commission and this idea of packing the Supreme Court to make sure only one side's philosophy is upheld more than not at the highest court in our land, that's not democracy. That's not in your and my best interest. That's in the best interest of far left-wing progressive socialist ideologues. Friends, government is not on your side. And we've shown this and proven this on item after item after issue after issue. The left wants more government. That's just going to lead to more failures, less freedom, less prosperity, as in our name. So we'll continue this march. Government is not your friend. The left is not your friend. And we'll talk more about it. Again, tomorrow, Dr. Bostom, and hopefully a follow-up on the TCI hearings that are ongoing now. We'll see you next game. From Mike Stenhouse, game out.